A Snicker of Magic, Chapter 6. I poured myself a glass of milk. Swig, swallow, gulp. I watched the words come splashing out of the milk carton and dissolve down in my glass. The crickets were singing twilight songs outside Aunt Cleo's window. The moon had bloomed starry white in the autumn sky. Dinner was over. Mama was working a late shift at the ice cream factory. Aunt Cleo, do you know anything about the brothers Threadbare? Cleo coughed and sputtered her tea. Her sewing scissors hit the floor and her hands stilled. She pushed her glasses up on her nose and stared at me as if she suddenly knew to study me especially carefully. Why do you want to know about those boys? Miss Lawson was talking about them in class. I poured a second glass of milk for Franny Joe, then noticed the refrigerator door shut with my hip. Your teacher told you about the brothers Threadbare? I nodded. I could have sworn I saw Cleo's hands tremble as she reached for her scissors. So do you know much about them? Only a little bit, Cleo mumbled. She drummed her long red fingernails against the table, collecting all her thoughts about the Weatherly brothers. But I don't know if we ought to talk about those boys. Her hand was trembling for sure when she lit her cigarette. Just the fact that Cleo was so suddenly nervous over dead and gone magician farmers made me want to talk about them even more. Apparently, I wasn't the only person who shivered just at the sound of their name. I need to know for school, I said, which was a little bit true, but the full-blown truth was this. I needed to know for me. I needed to know why my heart kicked every time I heard their name. I needed to know why the magic left when they did. Cleo tapped her cigarette against the ashtray. The ashes spelled out, Lucky, cursive, keeper. A fog of smoke escaped Cleo's lips when she spoke. Threadbare was a strange name. The brothers were really just farm boys called Stone and Barry Weatherly. I know that part already. I'd like to know more about the duel. I sat down across from Cleo and she pushed a bowl of Doritos towards me. Franny Joe lay on the couch, watching cartoons. Biscuit sat on the floor, staring up at us, waiting for the chips Cleo sometimes pretended to drop on the floor. Well, Cleo cleared her throat. Stone played guitar and Barry played the banjo. Some people think the magic came from the musical instruments, not the men. And most people think there was nothing special about them at all, of course. Those stories are probably just old mountain fairy tales. Is that what you believe? I asked. Cleo didn't answer my question, but she coughed out a cloud of smoke and words. Secret, sorrowful, Holly. Holly is my mother's name. Cleo didn't answer my question. According to the stories, Cleo wheezed, Stone lost the duel because he couldn't roar like a lion. They were going back and forth making animal noises. Barry screamed like a panther and challenged Stone to roar like a lion, but no sound came out of that poor man's mouth. The storm cloud hovering up above him morphed into the shape of a lion, which is the much snazzier trick if you ask me. But they didn't ask me, because I wasn't born back then, and bets are bets, and Stone lost. Biscuit won. Biscuit sat up and raised one floppy ear. You mean Barry won? I said. Barry, Cleo hollered. Sorry, Biscuit. She tossed my dog a sympathy Dorito. Anything else? I asked. The brothers Threadbare were real artsy types. Music might have been their magic, but they were good at everything they put their hand to. Barry could sew, and Stone, she sighed, was an artist. Like Mama, I said. Part of our gypsy lifestyle had to do with Mama's job. She was a traveling artist. She painted murals all over the South. She used to, anyway. She hasn't painted at all since before we left Kentucky. Don't I know it, Cleo nodded. I doubt Stone was as good as your Mama, but he was something. He was the first man ever hired to paint the gallery. The what? Cleo accidentally tapped her cigarette ashes into the bowl of Doritos. I figured it'd be best not to mention it. Stone painted the side of the drugstore. You know, that first wall you see when you cross the bridge into Midnight Gulch. We call that wall the gallery. Since Stone had magic in his veins, the picture he painted on the gallery changed every day. They say he walked right into the painting every now and again. Sometimes he did it to be funny, but sometimes, if he got mad over something his brother did, he'd go hide out in the painting and pout. That was some magic those boys had. Some magic, I mumbled. I thought about how it would feel to hide out in a picture, to have bones made out of paint, able to stretch across a blank canvas any way I wanted. Of course, people's painted 100 years' worth of graffiti all over the gallery now, Cleo said. You can't even tell what it looked like back then. The picture stopped changing anyway after Stone and Barry left. Because Stone was cursed with a wandering heart, I said sadly. Don't I know it? She stared at the grooves in the table and sighed. Do you think they regretted dueling once they had done it? Surely so. Cleo stood with a grunt. She tossed a stack of tabloid magazines off of the table and onto a chair. She pulled out a pile of quilt squares hidden underneath. I figured they were too proud to say they were sorry. Pride sure does a number on people. One more question before I go to bed, I asked. Cleo took up her needle and began sewing plaid star patches onto the squares. Sure, I reckon. Tell me about Roger Pickle. I blurted the words out before I could change my mind. Aunt Cleo's hands stilled. She looked up at me through pink-tinted glasses, and I could see a world of sad in her eyes. A bunch of words zoomed out of the quilt, all star-shaped. Sorrow, scandal, Holly, Franny, Felicity. Mama won't know, I begged. She won't be home for hours. I glanced over to see Franny Jo, arms propped on the back of the couch. She wanted to know more about Roger Pickle, too. We wanted to know 1,000 things, but we would settle for one mere thing at a time. Okay, Cleo said softly. She laid her patches gently in her lap. Patch it, mend it, stitch it back together. Those words were threads around her gray blonde hair, binding together in the shape of a star, then a drawbridge, then a full-bloom flower. For one thing, Cleo ran her hands over the quilt patches as she spoke, Roger Pickle liked to dance. He'd turn up the radio and take your mama's hand and pull her out to the middle of the room. He'd spin her round and hold her tight, and soon she'd laugh and forget that she didn't know the steps. Franny Jo closed her eyes. Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty. The words glittered in an invisible crown around her head. That was the only dancing Franny knew, the kind she'd seen in movies. She'd never seen how Mama used to dance, when she'd shake her hips and fling her hair around and laugh. Wild dancing. Free dancing. I want to dance that way someday, free as a mountain girl, not bound up like a princess. Cleo cleared her throat. He could play a guitar, too. Played in a rock band over in Knoxville sometimes, but he mostly played for your mama. She said he could sing down the stars. Anything else, I asked? He named you Felicity because he said it meant intense happiness. And that's exactly how he felt when he held you in his arms for the very first time. I could hear my heart again, speaking yes, but in a gentler way than it usually did. Yes, this is truer than true, and you can believe it. Yes, this is worth remembering no matter what else you figure out. And you, Cleo stood up and swooped Franny Jo up into her arms. He called you Frances Josephine after both your grandmothers. They were wild and wonderful and unique people, and he wanted you to be like them. And, she held out her hand to me, he loves you both, a heap and a bunch and more than you know. No matter where he is, what he's doing now, or what's happening between him and your mama, he loves you. He might come back, I said. I knew Mama hoped the same thing. She still carried a picture of him in her purse. In the photo, Roger Pickle wore a black t-shirt and blue jeans and a beard every bit as red as his hair. And so that's always how I pictured him, wearing those same clothes, looking that same way. I worried that most of the memories I had were the made-up kind. I could remember how I felt when he picked me up in his arms and I rested my head on his shoulder. I remember it because that's the safest I've ever felt, and I don't remember much else. He might, Cleo said. She didn't sound very convinced. She kissed Franny Jo on the forehead. But he loves you no matter what. One more thing, I asked as Cleo tucked us in. Franny and I shared an inflatable mattress in our room, which had formerly been Cleo's craft room until we surprised her and moved in. Cleo sighed. One more. I looked up at the picture situated on Aunt Cleo's wall, a black and white photograph of a man standing beside a hot air balloon. I saw the word again, threadbare, stretched across the balloon's canvas. What's threadbare mean? I asked. Shabby looking, Cleo said, and I saw the other words too. Old, thinned out, roughed up, well loved. She wheezed a laugh. The threadbare's what I am, I guess. Will you do me a favor, Felicity? Don't tell your mama that we talked about those boys. She doesn't like that story. I opened my mouth to ask why, but Cleo pressed her finger against my lips and said, No more questions. Y'all are making my brain tired. She walked over to the tiny window in our room and raised it to just barely. I heard crickets singing their goodnight songs to one another, and I smelled something glorious, like warm cookies just pulled out of an oven. I call that the sugar wind, Cleo said. I could hear a smile in her voice. It's the smell of the waffle cones they baked down at the ice cream factory. I think we were both comforted to know Mama was working in a place that smelled so wonderful. Cleo left the door cracked open for us so we'd have light if we woke up, so we wouldn't stumble through the dark. Franny snuggled up close to my one side, and Biscuit snuggled up close to the other. Catch me a poem? Franny asked. I whispered. Franny Jo lives in a house of stars. She has a cloud for a pillow and a comet for a car. She smiles like a sunrise, cries a rainbow when she's hurt. She'll dance across the sky tonight, then shake the stardust from her skirt. Franny snored softly, but I knew she'd heard my words. I saw them still shining above her, every little rippling with her easy breath. Comet, cloud, ballerina. I wished I could fall asleep as fast as Franny Jo, but I knew I wouldn't be able to until I heard Mama come back. I tried not to think about what might happen if she left work, got to the pickled jalapeno, and kept on driving. Left town, just disappeared, like Roger Pickle, like the brothers Threadbare. I closed my eyes and thought of those magical brothers playing music while the clouds swirled into new shapes above them. I thought about Roger Pickle playing guitar while my mama danced, her skirt swirling all around her as she stomped and jumped and kicked her legs. If I had magic in my veins like the Threadbares did, I'd make a home for all of us. And then I'd use my home magic to help Roger Pickle find us. I'd fill up a flare gun with blinking stars and shoot them into the universe. They'd spell out, "We're home," or maybe, "We're your home." He would follow the stars and find us. I'd see his favorite words spinning around his head. Holly, Felicity, Franny Jo. I'd hug his neck and we'd dance on home, wherever home is, because home is where shabby hearts like ours belong.